Join me to paint 3 beautiful Christmas trees using watercolor. In this video, we will be making 3 different Christmas cards, each with a unique texture, created using simple tools you can easily find at home. I hope you will enjoy painting these Christmas cards along with me. For the first card, I start by wetting the entire paper using a mop brush, as you see in the video. Next, I mix burnt sienna with a touch of sap green, and using a light value of this mix, I paint the background. Once the background is done, I elevate the board slightly and wipe off the excess pigment that has collected along the masking tape. We are going to use a sponge technique in this painting to create an evergreen tree. I cut the sponge into a small piece so it's easier to handle and gives more control while making the sponge texture. I'm picking up the pigment straight from the palette with a sponge instead of adding water to it. If you feel the pigment is too dry, you can slightly spritz it with spray bottle. I used Prussian blue to create the base structure of the tree. Next, I'm using sap green to build the next layer of texture. Usually, we use this sponge technique on dry areas, but in this painting, we are using it while the paper is wet. When using the sponge technique, there is a chance that instead of printing the texture, the sponge might lift the pigment from the paper. That usually happens when the paper is too wet or the pigment is too watery. Since we are using pigment directly from the tube and only added a spritz of water, there won't be any lifting of color while using the sponge technique. Next, for the third layer, I switch to Prussian blue, and finally, to create a darker shade on the left side of the evergreen tree, I use Payne's Gray. This whole process takes just a few minutes and it can be done effortlessly. Next, using burnt sienna, I add the tree trunk. Then, using a damp brush, I soften the base of the trunk as you see in the video. At last, I mix burnt sienna with Payne's Gray to paint the shadow part of the trunk. That's it, we have completed the first Christmas card beautifully. For the second card, I start by cutting a triangle shape on a scrap watercolor paper. We will use this as a stencil for our next snow-covered tree. After creating the stencil, you can reuse it to make more cards for your loved ones. I start by wetting the entire paper and then using a medium value of Prussian blue, I paint the background. After painting the background, I tilt the board and let the excess pigment collect near the masking tape, which I wipe off with a cloth. Next, holding the stencil firmly at the center of the paper, I sprinkle salt on the wet paint. The salt technique works best when you use 100% cotton paper. It also depends on how transparent your pigment is, the right timing when you sprinkle the salt, and the humidity of your room. When we talk about the right timing, it means the paper should have a soft sheen, but it shouldn't be too wet or too dry. And when we talk about the ideal room humidity, it should be around 40 to 70%. And with all these conditions in place, the salt technique creates a beautiful crystal like texture on the paper. Finally, I add the tree trunk using burnt sienna and deepen the shadow with a mix of burnt sienna and Payne's grey. And that's it, we have created our second Christmas card effortlessly. For the third card, I start by wetting the paper fully. Next, I mix Prussian blue with little sap green, and using a light value of this mix, I paint the background. As you see on the video, I paint only at the top of the paper. Then I tilt the board and let the pigment flow downward to create a soft natural background instead of a flat or gradient wash. When you tilt the board, the excess pigment gathers near the masking tape, which can be wiped with a cloth. After that, I let the paper to dry completely. The paper is completely dry. Now I'm mixing burnt sienna with Prussian blue to get a deep green, which we will use to paint the evergreen tree. Before getting ready to paint the evergreen tree, first we should spread the surface of the paper using a spray bottle. While spraying the water, be careful that the paper isn't soaked with water, but there should just be tiny droplets, mainly at the center of the paper where we will paint the tree. Next, using a piece of scrap watercolor paper as a tool, I am going to paint the tree with it. For that, first I dip the vertical edge of the paper into the paint to create the trunk, which acts as a guideline for the tree. Next, using the tip of the scrap paper, I start creating the branches at the top of the tree. You can adjust the width of the scrap paper to vary the size of the branches. You can see now that I'm tearing the paper a little to change the width. I'm keeping the branches slightly upward throughout this painting. You might notice that when the paint interacts with the tiny droplets of water on the paper, it forms an interesting texture on its own. The scrap paper creates one kind of texture and the droplets adds another form of texture. When both combine together, the tree gets a lovely organic look. At last, I add the tree trunk using burnt sienna, and for the shadow area, I mix burnt sienna with paint straight to get a darker value. Finally, using a damp brush, I soften the bottom of the trunk as you see in the video. That's it, we have completed 3 Christmas cards using 3 different watercolor techniques. Each of them creates a unique texture and gives it own festive charm. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more watercolor painting content. See you in my next video. Until then, take care and bye bye from Prema.